Hello all, welcome to the lecture on the sequence data, and in this lecture we are going to look at some of the operations that can be performed on a sequence data. So let's get started with slicing. So the slice object is used to slice a given sequence. The sequence can be strings, tuples, bytes, list or range, or any object which supports sequence protocol. And the slice object represents the indices specified by the range function given the start, stop and the step value, and the syntax for the slice function is given here. So basically the slice function takes in three arguments which have the same meaning in both the constructs. So the first argument is start, so that is the starting integer where the slicing of the object starts. The next one is stop, that is an integer until which the slicing takes place. So the slicing stops at the index n-1. So for example, I have given the second argument as 4. It means that is the stop value. So it is going to give me the sequence of values till 3. So next one is step, an integer value which determines the increment between each index for slicing. So for example, if you are giving 2, so you will be getting the values in the step size 2. So by default, if you don't give anything, it is going to take it as 1 as the increment value. If you are providing any value, then it is going to consider that as the increment value. So let's just get started with the example on string. So we've already created a string called strsample, which has a string called learning. So now my objective is to get the substring from a given string strsample. So we can use the slice object to do that. So on strsample, I am using the slice function inside the square brackets. Then inside the slice function, I am just giving three values, one for start, stop and the step value. So here the output I have already printed, that is ER, which is E and R from learning. So basically we have got that by specifying the starting index as 1. Slicing started from E and it will actually end at the index 4. Then it is 2, 3 and 4. So n will have the index 4, but actually it is going to give you till n-1, right? So it will stop at R, and since I have given the increment value as 2, it is not going to give you the sequence of strings as E, A, R, rather it is going to give you the sequence in terms of incrementing the strings by 2. So it is just going to give you the output as E, R alone. So this is how we use the slice function in order to slice given sequence of substrings from the given string or the any sequence object. The other method for slicing the elements or the substrings from a given object is using the square bracket. You don't have to use the slice function inside it. You can either use the slice function or the colon operator. Here I am using just a colon inside the square bracket so that it gives me all the substrings from a string learning, that is learning. Just placing colon inside the square brackets fetches me the learning, that is the complete set of strings from the main string, that is strsample. So this is how we perform the slicing on the string sequence data. So basically we use slicing whenever we want to perform any operations on a particular set of elements on your string, can be applied on any sequence data, so that all the values inside the string won't get modified based on your calculation or based on your operation. Only the particular set of elements or substrings will be modified based on the operations that you are performing on it. Similarly, we can perform the slicing operations in any other sequence data. For example, the next example to illustrate you is on list. So list basically have a default bit of functionality when slicing. So here let's just print what is there under the list sample. These are the elements that is there under the LST sample 1, 2, A, SAM and 2. So now I am going to perform slicing on the list sample. So I have not given any value before the first colon and I have given value after the colon. It means to start the slicing at the beginning index of the list. So let's just see what happens when we use colon 3. So the output is given here. So the slicing started from the beginning of the list, that is from 1 itself, and the next value is the stop value. So 0, 1, 2, 3. Since the stop index is at 3, it is just going to give you sequence of sub elements from your main list, which is just before the third index, that is 1, 2 and A. The other thing to note here is, if you have not provided a value after the first colon like this, then it means to go all the way to the end of the list starting from the index 2. So, this saves us time so that we do not have to manually specify length of len of LST sample in order to specify that is the end of a list. You do not have to specify anything after the first colon, so that it automatically takes all the sub elements till the end of your list. So, this is how we perform the slicing operation on a list. So, here if you have noted down, I have not used the slice function, rather I have just used the colon operator to slice the sub elements from the list. And if you can recall here, whatever order that you are giving here inside the slice function, the same applies here. But instead of using slice function, I have just used the square bracket, and if I give 2 colon 3 colon 1, then it means that the starting index is 2 and the ending index is 3 and the increment value is 1. For example, this is the start value and the stop value. Let us check what is the output. So, the slicing operation is being done from the index 2 of the list, that is 0, 1, 2 from A until 4, 3 and 4, and it is not going to consider the 4 as the index, but it just considered till n minus 1. So, that will be 3. So, it is going to give you A and SAM as the output. So, let us move on to performing the slicing on the other sequential data. So, here we have also created a dictionary sample, right. So, let us just perform slicing on it, but it gives you an error saying type error and hashable type, that is slice. So, if you can recall, the Python dictionary object provides a key value indexing facility, and the values in the dictionary are indexed by keys and they are not held in any order. In that case, we won't be able to apply that onto a set as well. So, let us just see what happens when we apply that onto a set. So, it also throws an error saying set object is not subscriptable, as we know that set is also a container to hold non-sequential data. So, the next one is slicing on the array. So, let us just print what we have it under the array sample, which has the values 1, 2, 3 and 4. So, if you want to basically slice the values inside your array, then you can just perform the same slicing operation on it. I have just given 1 colon giving us all the values from the first index, that is 2, 3 and 4, because the index corresponding to the value 2 is 1. You can also slice it by giving the reverse index or the negative index. I have given access the values from starting from the index 1 and the end index should be minus 1, that is the second last element of your array. So, let us just see what is the output. So, in that case you will just have 2 and 3 because you have excluded the first element that corresponds to the index 0 and the last value because we have given minus 1. Similarly, you can perform the same on a range as well. Since I have given range sample and inside the square bracket I have given colon and minus 1, you will be slicing all the values from the first, but then you will just exclude last element of the range, then it gives you only 1, 9, 4. So, now we have seen how to basically perform the slicing operation on the sequential data. So, now we will learn some of the most fundamental sequence data operations, that is concatenation and multiplication, which can be applied onto any sequential data. So, we are going to do concatenation using the plus operator, and there are a few ways of doing this depending on what you are trying to achieve, and the simplest and the most common method is to use the plus symbol to add multiple strings together or to add multiple elements together. It can be applied onto any sequential data as well. Simply place a plus between as many strings as you want to join together. So, let us see an example to do that. So, for example, so we know what is there under str sample, it just has a word learning, right. So, I am going to concatenate 2 strings together using the plus operator here. So, I am going to concatenate str sample with another string, that is Python, but before Python I have given a space inside single quote. So, it is going to have a space in between learning and Python. So, that is why I have given a space. So, let us just see the output. So, the first line is the output of the print str sample, and in the next line I am just checking whether it has been updated in the str sample or not, because I have joined a new string to the existing string. So, let me just print str sample and see what is there, but unfortunately it has only learning. The Python does not get updated to the existing str sample. That is why, because remember, strings are immutable, and if you concatenate or repeat a string stored in a variable, you will have to assign the new string to another variable in order to keep it, right. So, let us just do that. So, whatever operation that I am performing here, I am just updating it to a new variable so that it gets updated. So, now if you print the new string, then it will have learning comma Python as specified in the concatenation. So, this is how we do concatenation on a string. So, next let us see the concatenation on list. So, this is the original list that we have 1, 2, A, Sam, 2, and in the next line I am concatenating a list to the existing list LST sample, and the list contains a string, that is py, and I am giving that inside the square bracket. So, if you can see here, the py list has been added as an element to the existing list, that is LST sample. So, we do not have a separate list which contains a py string or gets updated as a last element in the original list itself. Let us see an example whether we will be able to concatenate two different sequence data. For example, let us try an example to concatenate the list and the arrays together. So, first let us see what is there under the array, that it has basically values 1, 2, 3 and 4, which are of integer data type, and by using a plus operator I am going to concatenate a list to the existing array. So, let us see whether that happens or not. The type error saying can only append array to array, not list to array. We are trying to append a list to an existing array, that is not possible. So, what we have to do here means, if you want to concatenate a sequence data to an array, then that sequence data should be of the same kind, that is array. So, what we can do here is we can use the same values, but just put them as array, basically using the array function and keeping the data type as integer and giving the values as list inside the array. Array sample will get concatenated with the given values, that is 50 and 60, since you created it as array and then concatenated. So, the next one is concatenating two tuples together. So, here if you can see here, I have just used plus and equal to, then it means that I am going to add a new tuple to the existing tuple tube sample, and that gets updated in the tube sample itself. So, the tube sample basically had 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 and py, and I have added a new tuple having two strings th and on gets added to the existing tuple sample, and that gets updated in the existing tuple sample because I have given plus and equal to. The next one is concatenation on set. So, basically here I have already have a set sample which has values 24 data, example and 87.5 as values of set. I am just concatenating a value to the existing set sample by just placing a comma after set sample and then updating it to the set sample, so that value will get updated in the actual set sample. So, if you can see here, I have run multiple times. So, each and every time you run, it is going to update it in the original set sample. So, similarly, you can perform the operation called multiplication on any sequential data. Multiplication in the sense, if you have a string, then if you are performing multiplication operation on it, then it is going to repeat the values to the number of times that you have given as a multiplier. Here let us see what happens. So, I have a str sample here and I have given asterisk equal to and 3. So, I have str sample asterisk equal to 3. It means that I am going to repeat whatever is there under str sample, and then I am going to update it to the existing str sample itself. So, let us just run. So, learning is a string under str sample. Since I have given 3 asterisk 3, it has repeated the string thrice and it gets updated in the str sample, and that is why while printing the str sample you got the output as learning, learning and learning. But what happens when you perform it on a list? It also has both numbers and strings to it, but in this case it is just going to repeat the elements of your list twice since you have given asterisk and 2. So, basically the Python does not do explicit conversion. For example, if you are performing an operation which has string, then it is not going to multiply a number with the given value. Rather, it is just going to repeat the values to the number of times that you have given. But if you are trying to access a particular value which is of integer, and then you are performing a multiplication operation on it, and then in that case it is going to multiply that particular value to the given number of times. Let us see an example. Here we have a value that is 2 that corresponds to the first index, and I am just trying to multiply that with the value 2 and also trying to update it in the original list. So, now let us see what will be the output. So, in this case originally you had 1, 2, A, Sam and 2, and since I have given LST sample of 1 asterisk equal to 2, that particular value has been multiplied with the given value that is 2. So, this is what happens when you are performing a multiplication operation on an integer or a float. But whereas if you have any string value and if you are trying to perform some multiplication operation on it, for example, we have a value called A, right. So, 0, 1, 2, 2 is the index corresponding to it. So, let us just try what happens. So, it is going to repeat that particular element to the number of times that you have given here. Since I have given 2, the value gets repeated twice. So, this is what happens when you do multiplication operation on any kind of sequential data that you have. Yeah, the same example I have repeated in the below cell. So, already it is double A, and if you are trying to multiply that with the number 2, then it is going to repeat it twice again. Let us see what happens when you do the multiplication on a tuple. So, what I am doing here is I am going to slice a particular set of elements from the tuple and then going to do and then perform the multiplication operation. So, before that let us just print what is there in the tuple sample. So, what is there in your tuple sample list? 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 and py. 2:4 slices the elements, that is 3 and 4, and I am going to multiply that twice. It is just going to repeat that particular element twice. And the next thing is performing the multiplication on array. It also basically repeats the given array twice since you have given asterisk 2. And the next one is range sample. We are just multiplying the range sample by 2. It throws an error saying type error unsupported operand type for asterisk, range and integer. And we have come to the end of the script. In continuation with the previous lecture, in this lecture we have seen how to perform some of the slicing operations on any sequential data. We have also seen what happens when we do slicing on a container which stands for holding non-sequential data. And followed by that we have seen how to perform some of the operations like concatenation and multiplication on any sequential data. And we have also seen, for example, what happens when we try to multiply two numbers and what happens when we do the multiplication on a string. In the upcoming lectures we will be seeing about sequential data methods. Thank you.